I'm going to start reassembling this Retina IIIc shutter now, starting with the diaphragm mechanism. So I've got my assembly jig here, which is very complicated. I'll tell you about that another day. Start with this plate. Rivet upwards. This is where the diaphragm blades go. All these parts have been cleaned and they just need to be reassembled. Now, cleaning components needs a video all of its own, I believe. That comes more under the heading of general camera repair techniques. Here I'm showing you the specifics for this particular model of camera. So the blades are laid out on top of each other for the most part until you get round a bit further. Diaphragm blades, unlike shutter blades, are interleaved, so there is no top blade. All the blades are effectively doing exactly the same job. Now we're round to this part and the hole is obscured under the tip of that blade, so I need to open that up slightly. These diaphragm blades have got a little bit of curve to them. That's probably because there was a fair bit of oil on them and they were probably got very sticky, particularly in cold weather. And if you force the settings when the blades are very sticky, what happens is that the blades inevitably distort. If you do a good enough job of it and things are really well stuck, the rivets, which form pivot points for these blades, will actually get torn out. These are fine. So I'm checking that all those blades are seated. Here's the ring that rotates, and as it rotates it pulls the blades in, and it has to be laid on in the right position, and as it happens the right position is here. So I'm checking that that drops down over those rivets. And all 5 are seated correctly. Now this little rivet post, the one I mentioned was sticking up, that has to come up through this little slotted hole in the case, and then that will be the correct alignment. Just give that a wriggle to settle it. Now I can lift off the outside of my bracket, and I'm just checking to see if everything's remained in place. Some of the blades have moved here. I'm just going to see if I can pop those back into place. I'll start the screws. We'll do the wriggling process after that. 3 screws, short, and all I want to do at this stage is get the screws in position, just so the plate doesn't move out of alignment. I don't need that tightened down. In fact, I need it a little bit loose because some of those rivet posts are not where they should be. So I'm going to lift that off now and get rid of that. You can possibly see that this rivet here and this rivet here are not sitting where they should. So I'm going to manoeuvre things and hopefully they'll fall into place. Not quite. That one's nearly there. Those 5 rivets are all where they should be, but I'm not sure that they are sitting in the slots in the other component. So I'll just rotate that a bit and see what happens. The blades are not coming in evenly. They're pretty close. That's it. I just heard one click and that was one of the rivets dropping into its slot. Right, 3 screws can now be snugged up. And that is the outer case and the diaphragm blades all in place. So for the next task is to assemble the mechanism plate. The main mechanism plate, this component, all the works of the shutter by and large fit on there. So we've got 3 major components here. The mechanism plate, the blade actuating ring and the lens tube. So the blade actuating ring is what we need to fit. There's a little spring here. This is the detent. The detent's job is to keep the blade actuating ring in the parked position unless it's being actively pushed by the main spring. So that fits in there like that. It should drop into the slots. That's it. It's making sure it's not trapped. A little bit of fluff there. That off. Alright. The detent spring fits over this post. And the blade actuating ring is held in position by the lens tube. The lens tube has 3 screws holding it in place. It only fits in one place. Making sure nothing's trapped, making sure that the pallets here is not trapped under that frame. That's fine. There are 3 screws here. They're pretty much identical, except one is slightly longer. It's not that one. It's been swapped with something else. I'll just find out what I've done with that. That will be here. Of the 3 screws, 2 of them are slightly shorter, probably about 1/2 millimetre shorter, not much more than that. They fit in this position, and this position. This position is special. That is where the bracket sits that holds the main drive spring. That has the longer screw because it has to pass through that little bracket. If you swap the springs around and have them in the wrong place, what would happen is that you'd have the screws penetrating the mechanism plate. At the back of the mechanism plate here you can see those screws. Here's one, another, and the other one. They're just below the surface. If you swap them around, one of them would stick up proud. If it stuck up proud, it would catch the shutter blades and then you'd be in deep trouble. So I'm checking that this blade actuating ring moves smoothly, and it does. That part's ready. It's just waiting for me to add a little bit of lubricant to that, and I'll show you what I do. Alright, so I just might need to lubricate that blade actuating ring. It feels pretty good anyway, and I'm going to just lubricate it with graphite powder. And I'm just going to put a little bit of graphite powder down here, and here, 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 and here. And I just want to work that backwards and forwards, because that's all it takes. And then I need to blow that excess off. And that is the job done. Next we can put the blades on. So I need to slide this across to the blade open position, which is there. Swing that over. We've got 5 shutter blades. And they're all identical. On the middle of that screen? Yes, close enough. And we'll start here. Shutter blades, unlike diaphragm blades, are laid on top of each other as you go around. So the last blade lies on top of the first blade. They're not interleaved. Right, so much for that. Now we can put the case back on over the mechanism plate. And this will hold the shutter blades in place. Usually it fits pretty easily. Sometimes something might hold it up. Is it? It's not quite on. Why not? Blades are good. There's nothing in here. There's a bit of fluff there. I want rid of that. That's better. 3 countersunk screws, flathead screws to some of you. Now I didn't do that up tight. We need to check that everything moves freely before we do anything rash like that. Just getting it in place. it back over. Now I'm just going to swing the blades back. That's good, that's all nice and smooth. And snug those 3 screws up. That's that particular task done. Now I just want to apply a little bit of lubricant here now. This is molybdenum lubricant. Dry paste. Well, it's not that dry, but it's called a dry paste. So I want some in here where that detent spring fits over that little post. I just want to wipe a bit in there. And it takes very little indeed. It just lubricates that so that that detent is not creating a lot of friction. At this point and this point of the blade actuating ring, those 2 points get picked up by the cam, the main drive cam, and they need to be lubricated. Again, there's just a tiny smear of the stuff. There's virtually none of this. Unless you look very closely, you'd see nothing. I'll just run it on that surface there, and that surface there. That's good. Now the next task is to fit various springs and other components. Alright, now we've got to fit various springs to this mechanism plate. The first one is this beast. That fits over this arm here. That rivet's got a groove under it. It just fits under there like that. So the bent arm of that spring is round this piece. The straight part is down here, and we need to hook it behind this piece. So I'll do that. Sorry if my hands obscure your view. This is an awkward task. So I'm holding a toothpick down on that post so that spring can't get away. You don't want them zipping off to the other side of the room. I almost had that hooked on there, but it didn't want to stay. That's it. So now this lever is sprung loaded by one end of the spring. This lever is sprung loaded by the other. Now we will need to put in the B lever spring. Now the B lever spring is this beast. That fits over a post. There's a groove in the post and it fits in the groove. And it's fitted like this. I just push that back across. I'm checking that it's in the groove. It nearly was. And now I want to fit the B lever. So I hold this tab back because it's sprung loaded, and I'm going to just slide the actuating ring forward so that I can fit the B lever. The B lever's got a tiny little notch in the back of it which catches that B lever spring. So we want to catch the spring as we slide this into position. There it is, and with the blades in the open position, the B lever just drops into place. Now we have another spring. This is on a screw. The screw of course holds down the B lever. This spring needs to fit in here. Just checking that that B lever is free to move. And it is. The spring needs to be swung back across. We need it over here at this end, because the other end down here needs to be up against this tab. Right, I can tighten that screw. Again, check that the B lever is free. And by holding the B lever back with my finger, I can then grab the actuating ring and pull the shutter closed. Check that spring once more, that's all good. Next components. Here. Now this component, that sets the self-timer or delay action, and also sets the flash sync. There's 2 points we need to lubricate. There's a little ratchet piece down here. That needs to be lubricated. Again, I'm using just this tiniest smear. And this spring in the case here is a detent, and I'm just lubricating that as well. So the pin here needs to drop down into the case on this side of that spring. There we have it. So I've got this sitting on a block of wood. It allows this piece to hang over the edge so that the shutter will sit flat. There's a shim that goes on here, and it only fits in one position. There's a notch in the case here and a matching tab on that. And I'm just shifting that aperture, the diaphragm setting just across of it. Here's the ring that acts on it. It's got a little hole in there, a little notch. That picks up that tab. There it is, in place. There are 3 screws. Very fine thread. One. Two. Again, I'm getting these in position first, and tightening them up comes last of all. Check that that works. It's nice and smooth. He moves very easily. Snug those 3 screws down. And that's it. Our next task is to put the flash sync equipment in there. And so to the flash sync stuff. First component is the pallet wheel. This revolves, its speed is controlled by the pallets here, which rattle in and out. The pallet wheel is driven by this little lever here. Now I'm just interested in lubricating 2 points on this. This point, where a catch works on it, and just a little bit in the pivot point. And this component sits here over that post. The tail end of it should drop down there. That's good. And there's a spring that fits in there. And if I can find my pliers, we'll put it in place. So the loop in the spring hooks over that point there, and the little bent up piece drops into that hole there. The lever catches behind here when it's cocked, like that. As the shutter fires, that's released, and you can hear that pallet wheel revolving against the pallets. If I hold back the B lever, I can return that. Next we have the flash contact components. This lever I'm just lubricating in the pivot. You can see this spring here that comes back against the case at this point. So this needs to be tucked in, swung around, oops, and of course the spring is sticking right up in the air. That's not right. Let me take that off. Oh, that case, it's caught on that tab there. Alright, try this again. That flash contact is bent out. As a result, it's very hard to get this lever down behind it. Normally that would not be a problem. There we go. It's dropped down into this flash contact here. That's the tail end which contacts the other flash lever component. It's been bent out of shape by someone else. Here's the main flash contact. That sits over that piece we've just popped in there. Let's see if we can get that to sit nicely. That bent up contact is just tensioning this a little bit too much. Oops, that's not right. The other end is trapped. That's better. Here we go. That's fine, and we'll need to adjust that into position shortly, I would say. This lever releases the main drive cam when you fire the shutter. I'll pull this to the cocked position. It allows that flash contact to swing back out of the way. Allows me to seat this correctly. One small spring at this screw at this end. And a return spring and screw at the other end. The return spring looks like that. That sits there. The screw has got a shoulder in it, a step in it, and that spring must sit around that shoulder. You don't want it getting trapped underneath, so I'm just checking that it's free, that the spring isn't trapped underneath it. That's good. Whoopsie, do without that. Now we swing the spring into place. The spring comes over to this side of the lever. Lift it up, it drops into a little slot. There's a little slot in the back of this lever and it drops into there. So that's sprung loaded now. That's all good. The last component I'm putting over here, let's just check those two screws before we go. The last component here is the shutter release lever. I apply a tiny bit of lube to the shaft. That's all. That drops into a hole here. This tab must be on the inside of the B lever the spring needs to tuck down into the case. So I'm just going to force that round with a screwdriver while I keep my finger on it. That's good, and I'll just push on that spring to make sure that's set nicely in the case. Now that's not sitting quite down far enough. That's better. You can see how it acts on this lever. It lifts it as you fire the shutter. That's right on the border there. I'd say that something's not quite... Yeah, it's better. It's a bit reluctant to sit in place, that one. I'm not sure what's going on. I'll just tuck that spring down a bit further. That might have been springing it up. That's better. Alright. Next we need to fit the main drive cam and its spring, the main drive spring. So here's our cam. And to lubricate this, I'm using the molybdenum again. Just rub a little bit on the inside. This curved surface needs to receive it. That's where it rubs up against the retard gear train. And if you don't lubricate that, you'll end up with grief, because when you cock the shutter, that will be a high friction area and it will cause grief. I'm just putting some on the surfaces here and here. That's the two areas that pick up the blade actuating ring. This just pops on over there, and here's the parked position round this way. The main drive spring. I apply a bit of lubricant to the inside surface of that, and there's no need to go overboard. That drops on. There's a hole in the main drive cam right there at the base, and the little piece in the spring that catches in there, that should go into there. The tab at the top needs to be swung round and catches in the end of this bracket. Now that's cocked. If we revolve the tab, the main cam, that'll catch in there. If we fire the shutter, it'll fire. One more point I want to lubricate there. On this lever, that face needs a little bit of lubricant. That's where it runs against the main drive cam. Just so it drops in nicely. And that's all that's required for that. The next items to be installed are the delay action timer and the retard gear train. Alright, here I've got the retard gear train and the delay timer, or delay action or self timer. Now I'm going to lubricate these with a little bit of graphite powder. There are other ways you could lubricate these, but lubricating things dry like that works well with shutters, because you don't want to limit the amount of liquid lubricants you've got floating around inside shutters. Inevitably they find their way onto the shutter blades, and that causes you grief. So I'm just dropping a bit of powder in here, working the action, knocking out any powder, and we'll blow that out before it goes. The self timer, much the same deal. Drop a little bit of powder in there. Hold back this tiny tab, which is the release on it, and let the self timer run. Now a little bit of graphite there between the gear teeth. That will rub in, break down, generally act as lubricant. An alternative way of doing that would be to be watchmaker for a day. In which case, when these components were fully cleaned, you would get your little tool and your watchmaker's oil, and you would apply a tiniest drop of oil to the pivot points here and here. But that's the other way. That's not the way I'm doing it. I'll just blow that out. You don't want loose graphite powder appearing in your shutter, not because it would do the shutter any harm, but it will put little shiny specks inside on the back of one of your lenses, which would be very disconcerting. That's good to go. So, to do the retard gear train, cock the shutter by swinging that across, which arms the flash sink. Swing the main drive cam round. Now that's quite stiff, of course, because of the spring. Drop in the retard gear train. At this end, this lever catches behind this point on the blade actuating ring. So you need to pull it back with your finger so it drops behind it. That's better, I can hear it click. Get the right screws. There are two long screws. The longest of them is for the self-timer. This is the pivot. That screw serves as the pivot for this gear train. I'm just checking that lever's free. And the screw at this point goes through an enlarged hole in the speed train at the base there, so that the speed train can be adjusted this way or that way to increase or decrease the amount of interaction of the speed train with the main cam. I'll set it roughly in the middle. And now I'm going to fire the shutter and see what it sounds like. And it's jammed, so something's not right. Oh, delay timer? No, it's not that. I can see it's caught completely up here. It's not that either. Something's catching. Right. Recock that. Oh, I know what we've got here. It's jammed it fully open. I have to investigate. Okay, well, I discovered why the shutter was jammed, and it was because of the position of this screw, which I had disturbed when I was taking the shutter apart. And I said at the time that I'll have to check the position of that to make sure it's alright. It's a, you can adjust the position of that, and it affects the position of where the shutter blades, or the shutter blades open to. It affects the blade actuating ring actually. So what it was doing effectively was it was stopping the actuating ring from moving far enough to allow the main drive cam to release and pick up the tab on the other side and bring the shutter back. So now, if I cock the shutter and fire it, everything works as it should. Now to the delay action. This fits in here. That has the longer of those two long screws in it. This is already extended out in the cock position. I'm just going to hold this tab back with my screwdriver. The self-timer will run. and it'll pull back this tiny tab here which locks the shutter when you set the self-timer until the self-timer has run. That's it there, it's just pulled that back. And that's it. So far so good. Now to the next part. You have the cocking ring and the little gear that runs off it. The gear couples to the cocking ring with its teeth, and the gear has a tab on it which hooks into the main drive cam and rotates it as the cocking ring rotates. So this sits down here, that tab sits in here into that little space. The cocking ring I want to lubricate. I want to wipe some molybdenum on the inside edge, on the outside edge around that catch, around that protrusion there, and a little bit along that gear line, won't hurt at all. And that's all that's required. The spring hooks over a post. The post is here on the end of that lever. You can swing that into place. The teeth here, the end tooth on this gear goes into the last position on the ring, the cocking ring. This little component here serves to stop you from depressing the shutter release unless the shutter is actually cocked. It drops in here, the spring hooks behind this post, so I've got to hold the end of the spring back with a toothpick while I rotate it with my finger until it drops into place. And you can see how it drops into place here. So now the shutter release is blocked. When the shutter's cocked, this ring lifts this, which allows you to depress the shutter release. And that's all there is to that. Before you put the speed ring on here, you must check that this lever is being held back by the end, by the notch on the cocking ring. Here's our speed control cam. This area here is the cam. That's what controls the position of the retard gear train. And I'll rub that round in there just for a bit to lubricate it, and again on that surface. This opening here must fit over these pins. At this side, that's your B lever. That must be, the ring must rotate so that's not trapped. This position on that bump just there, that's the 1/8 of a second, and that's where you can test it. And that's running much too fast. That's nothing like an 1/8 of a second. So it means that the retard gear train needs to be swung in so it engages more with the main drive cam. So I've cocked that, the shutter's cocked. I'll lift that off, lift off the cocking ring, loosen this screw, swing that main drive cam in, retard gear train in. Doesn't need much, we're probably only talking, I'd had 1/4 of a millimetre, something like that. Just counting the teeth here just to make sure I've got this connected in the right place. That's better. That's tucked down behind there. Everything else is in place. We'll try again. Put the ring on, everything's in the right place. That's the 1/8 of a second That's pretty good. It's a bit fast, but it's nearly right. I'll cock the shutter, lift off the cocking ring, loosen that screw, shift the retard gear train in just ever so slightly. That's probably too much. We'll see. Bring the cocking ring back in place. That little lever's trapped under it. That's better. Make sure that's tucked down. Looks good. Pop this ring back on. Make sure it's not trapped. Here's the 1/8 of a second position. That's still too fast. A bit more work. You don't have access to this screw if the shutter's not cocked. It must be cocked. Everything's settled back in place. Make sure everything's tucked down as it should be. Start again. Cock the shutter. That's better. That sounds very good. That'll do me for now. I'm going to put the front retaining ring on there. Just do this down loosely. We're not trying to achieve anything special. That's good. Now we can leave it set at 1/8 of a second. I want to check the self timer, cock the shutter, set the self timer, release the shutter. It should run down smoothly and release the shutter. That's good. I'm pleased with that. I'm going to do one more thing while I'm here. I want to make sure that the flash sink looks correct. In here you can see the little flash contact and the contact on the casing. Now that should touch there. I've set the shutter to B. I want to make sure that that blade contact is touching. And if it is, it's only just. So I'm going to just bend out that contact on the casing slightly because it's tucked in anyway too far. Just swing that out a bit. Cock the shutter, have another look. Oh, definitely. That's definitely touching. Flash is good. Okay. Outer shutter case next. Time for the outer shutter case components. Well, here's the outer case. And here's the curved rack and the pusher that go inside it. And all I want to do here, in the way of lubricant, take that to start off with. Throw a tiny amount on there. Now you can hardly see that, but molybdenum, you need very, very little to create a low friction surface. And the same on there. Do the edges, do that face. Drop in the curved toothed rack there, and the pusher goes at this end. Pop that back again. Get in there. That's that. Now I cock the shutter like that. And this tab needs to go on the end of that pusher, or behind the end of that pusher. And you hardly saw anything there. Something's not right, it's not pushing down into place. And I'd say to guess that tab is not behind there. That's better. No, it's not better. That's better. There's a little tiny flash contact on the body of the body of the shutter. I'll show you that. Let's get that off and do it all again. Show you what we need to watch out for. There's a tiny flash contact here, sticking up like a tiny copper blade. That needs to fall into the slot here. Assemble those parts. That's all cocked. I'm watching these screw holes because I know that's where I need to end up. Alright, so I've got to rotate it round that far. If I had my glasses with me, I'd even be able to see what I was doing. That's better. Right. So we've got to get this little plastic thing over that contact. I've just rotated it a little bit more. That's sprung into place. 3 screws go in here. That large one in the middle. And that larger screw head there, that couples with there's 2 smaller screws here. They look very much the same, but they're different diameters. The large diameter one goes in here, and the small diameter one goes in here. There's not much in it. They're both tiny screws. Put them in the wrong place, you're going to have problems. One more screw we need to do here, and for that I need a small screwdriver. This flash contact I told you about there, that acts as a clamp, that plastic part. There's a screw here. That just needs to be snugged up. It doesn't need to be very tight. You can see it bearing on that plastic part, just crushing it in a bit. That's all it requires. You don't need to go mad. Now we need the front control rings. I'm still on the screen, I am, only just. 2 components go together here. That's your speed control ring there. And this little piece couples with the diaphragm setting lever here. Again with the lubricant. Now on this face, the face with the lever sticking up, just need to rub a bit of lubricant on there, and not very much. Once around the inside, job done. That fits into the slot. That tab runs through that slot in that ring, and that's it. Now we can swing this into place. There are 2 notches in this ring, one here, one here. They couple with this piece and that piece. The tab runs into this slot on this lever. So I get it into that slot first, and then I'll rotate the rest of it until it drops over at this point and that point. At that stage, the aperture setting and the shutter setting should move together, and they do. We can remove that retaining ring. It'll be doing its proper job shortly. This piece. This provides us with our aperture settings showing at the top of the shutter. That sits on the chrome ring, and there's a tiny notch in here, matches up with a tiny tab down there. Here we have our centerpiece. This piece is the bayonet mount for the lens. These notches in here form the detent for the shutter speed settings, and I'm just rubbing a bit of lubricant across there. That contacts this tab here and gives us our click, click, click as you turn the shutter speed. This goes on here, it only fits in one place. There's a post and a notch, and that drops into place. Your number plate will be over here on the side. That's sitting firmly. Now we can pop in the front retainer ring and roll that in by hand. Now from memory, this was slightly loose when we started off. Just another one of the things that weren't quite right with this whole camera really. Right, that's good. Now you can tighten this ring down until it becomes quite stiff. When it's quite notchy and stiff to change, that's just too much. I'm going to back that round one position until one of the screw holes is exposed. Here we have one here. So I centre that up. Get our last little piece that's left over, which is that tiny screw, the one with the mutilated screw head, which we'll also blame on other people. It's been a great day blaming other people today. Don't lose that screw. I haven't got any spares. They have all been lost. All the spares I had have been used to replace screws that have rolled off the table and disappeared into the never never. Right, I'm just giving that a wipe with a bit of solvent just to clean that surface. Clean around there. I'll give that a puff out. That shutter is complete. Just waiting to have the lenses put back, and then it can go on the camera.